Hey guys, Dave from Nerdarchy, for nerds, by nerds, hang out with this nerd.
Nerdarchy Ted.
And it's time to delve into D&D and maps. How are you using them in your game? We start this video by thanking our sponsor, Nord Games. Down in the description below, you can find a coupon code for 10% off on Nord Games products. Oh, there's also a link that'll give you the same discount on anything in the shop.
Games for gamers by gamers.
We had a GM 911 sent in by staff editor Doug, a longtime friend and fan, although this is actually more of a viewer suggestion than GM 911.
So he wants to talk about how do you use maps properly in an RPG.
Maps. Okay. This is going to really depend on your play style and how you're doing. And there's several different ways to use maps in your game.
All right, so let's break it down into different types of maps that you're going to come across. First off, you got, town maps, building maps, however you want to look at it. Geography. You have overland travel maps, the bigger picture, and then you got the dungeon maps themselves.
Right, so yeah, I guess you would start, like if you're going from a top-down view, it's like the wider geography of the world, campaign, continent, wherever you're adventuring at, to, the actual locations, which could be the town, could be the dungeon. And I've done different things. I've done completely mapping everything out on my own and having it laid out for my players so that they have a resource, the town they're in, whatever. I've also done no maps where I've started running an adventure in a dungeon and my players are drawing the maps so they don't get lost. And what they don't know is they're actually drawing the map for me so I know where they went.
So you ask at the end of the night, hey, can I get a copy of that map? Oh, what for? Oh, so I have a copy of the dungeon?
Yeah,
and
pretty much.
I've done the same thing. And it goes to show that having a map is not necessarily important, because unless you've got a party full of dwarves where they're all paying attention to elevation and what have you, rooms can kind of go under or go over, because when you start going underground, not everybody is aware of how things twist and turn, and when things go wrong, it's magic.
So I've played all different styles when it comes to using maps, and also too, like, it depends. Are you playing Theater of the Mind? Are you using battle maps? Maybe you're using dungeon terrain, right? And you're actually laying it out as you go, and it's all 3-dimensional. So those things become trickier too, because what happens once you've laid out the dungeon, but now you're done? So now you might actually have to do a mock-up on a piece of paper if you think this is something that your players are going to go back to. Or, if you have hand-drawn maps, you can keep them in a folder somewhere. And as we've said often in the past, there is almost zero reason to draw a map ever again because of the internet. There's so many good resources out there. Dyson's Logo is an awesome place to find maps that you can use in your game. Pyromancer, they have maps. You can make your own maps. It's easy software that's easy to use. It's great. Elven Tower is another great resource. You go over to his website, there's maps there to download. So, we're in the golden age of maps if you want to use maps in your game. Whether you're just talking about printing them out and laying them on the table, whether you're talking about doing a screen share because you're playing by Skype or Google Hangouts, or you're importing them into a virtual tabletop like Fantasy Grounds.
So this gives you the ability to have these resources if you're printing something out and the players have done their work. Well, maybe the dungeon that they're going to is something that's famous. It's been plundered and investigated by adventurers for years, but something about it keeps drawing the monsters in, and they need to go. How crazy is it? It's like, okay, guys, here's the map that you found in the library. They know what the dungeon layout is before they start. It's a utter game changer for them. It might not necessarily look that way when they go, because things can change.
The map could be mismarked.
The map could be mismarked. It could be magical terrain that shifts. Belays could have gotten through there, collapsed tunnels and opened new ones, and it could lead to an entirely another section of a dungeon, totally unexplored before. So there's always changes that can happen. So you want to be prepared for surprises.
It used to be a standard trope to find a treasure map. Like in earlier editions, and I'm sure there's tables out there with it even now where you roll randomly and one of the things that comes up is a map. And like you said, that's a great idea because you can grab one of these resources if you don't want to just make it yourself and print it out and be like, "Yep, here's the map you found," and and then the map takes on a whole nother meaning. It's not just something you as the DM are using to track your monsters and the route of the players. It's not just it's not just something you lay on the table. It actually now becomes a prop in your game as well.
And props are something that are going to wind up becoming something that's more important because it's not just, oh, you've got a map. No, you physically have given them one. You could print it out on different kind of paper that looks different. I've gone in the LARPs that I've done, and I've actually burned the edges to actually make it look worn and tattered, and you can do these tactile changes so that the player feels like, oh man, this is something special. I have to be careful with it.
Yeah, I've seen people rub them in dirt, crumple them up, do tear marks, do burn marks, all that stuff to make it seem more authentic. And also, like for fun, you could do things like rip off a section of the map and be like, you have most of the dungeon right here, but you don't know what's going on over in this section.
Those I find are always the best, and it makes you wonder, like, what happened to that? Did someone tear it off on purpose, or was it just an accident of time?
Well, actually, that's a really good point, Ted. That was it an accident or was it intentional? And like that could lead to an adventure all by itself because like maybe they're like, well, we need to find the other piece of this map before we can go on the actual adventure with the map.
It could be like a significant portion or something that's very important to what's there. Like it's got the clue. You go to the dungeon, you get to that spot, and you can't proceed because of this missing piece. If you're talking about it being ripped on purpose, perhaps it opens to a dark and terrible secret. And this person's like, well, if I just destroy this section, then no one will ever be able to plumb these depths again, and it'll be locked away and it'll be safe. Well, if you go through all of this, they've explored the dungeon, they've gotten to this point, they go and they get to this person, and maybe they find them on his deathbed, and he unveils this that the thing is destroyed, but he refuses to give it because it's this whole thing here. You've had this crazy journey, and it's led them to an end, whether they're happy with it or not. They can't go forward, or maybe they push and they go down a dark path and they want it opened, so they wait till he dies and they cast Speak with Dead and then command it and do all these crazy things because they feel they need to keep going.
Well, that actually kind of got the juices flowing for me a little bit when you're talking about this 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 idea of it being ripped intentionally to hide a secret, and maybe it's ripped in just the way that it looks like. Oh, thank God all the important parts of the map are intact, right? And they go and they explore the dungeon, they clear it out, they do the thing, and it is like later on they get summoned to this guy's deathbed and he's been like holding this thing in for all these years and there's so much guilt and he reveals the final piece of the map and lets out his dark secret, and maybe something horrible will happen if the players don't address this secret or what happened. And on his deathbed, his dying request is for them to right this wrong that he was never able to, and he hid for so many years. So it could then lead them back to the same location they'd already had an adventure in, maybe years ago, right, in the game. And then they can have a whole brand new adventure. And, that other area that they had cleared out or did whatever they did with, maybe it's been repopulated. Maybe it's being used for something else. Maybe there's something else going on there in addition to the thing that they have to deal with. And, maybe it's not even nefarious, but now it's kind of owned by someone else or being used or repurposed, and you can't just go traipsing through someone else's home or property or whatever they're using it for now, and it becomes this role playing exploration and social interaction scenes that they have to go through to even get to this portion of the dungeon they missed the first time and complete this quest.
So then there's the whole other side of, well, how do you actually use the maps in the game? As we said, you can have them behind the screen, you can have them in front of the screen, and it's completely up to you as the DM and the party whether they want to know what the whole dungeon looks like ahead of time, whether they understand they're going into some dungeon that's going to be, this is tonight's adventure, or this is a mega dungeon that this is the entire campaign. You can go in many different ways. And I mean, I've even, talked to players who are like, yeah, I want to do a campaign where they enter the dungeon at level 1 and they don't leave till they're level 20. That's the campaign. And it's like, whoa, that's massive. That's not necessarily my style of game, but I'm certain there's gamers out there that would love to do something like
Well,
that.
you could do it, but generally you'd like go back to town to sell the stuff you found and re up on supplies, and you'd then go back and delve deeper into the dungeon. It's definitely a style of play. Also, too, you might be a DM, or you might be a DM that wants to lay out the battle grid and draw the dungeon as you go. That's totally viable as well. Or you might do what we do, and you may only draw the room that you're in where the fight's going on, so that tactically everyone knows positioning. But for the most part, everything else you're just doing theater of the mind. So you kind of like zoom in and use a map when you feel like you need it.
So the maps, there's plenty, as Dave says, there's plenty of resources online. I love the ones that you can say, okay, I want this size with this many rooms, and you hit the button, and then you just hit randomize until you get a layout that you like, and you can print out loads of maps these ways. It gets really useful, really handy. I tend to, I'll pick 4 or 5 of them at a time, print them out, and save them for just in case I need to pull something, out of the air. Oh, well, let's put in a dungeon tonight. Voila, you're ready to go. And when it's not, you have to sit and design every nook and cranny yourself. It's much easier, when you can just hit the button.
Well, but that even being said, like there's software now that makes it so much easier. Like you don't have to be necessarily good at drawing. There's objects you can drop right on your map and have that stuff there, and it can even be a little bit artistic. So you have a ton of options out there, I guess is what I'm saying.
So, as we said in the beginning, have no fear in handing things to your players, and be prepared to change it up so that they have the surprises that they weren't expecting. Feel free to keep things a secret so that the players don't know what's going on, and they could be going into a 3-room dungeon or a 30-room dungeon. They just might not know, and be prepared to lay out the grid and have fun with it, or go completely theater of the mind and allow their imaginations to run away with it.
They're all viable. I've literally done maps when they're just just lines, but with maybe a circle or a square to they designate that there's something there, like a
Mm-hmm.
room or a bigger passage or something like that. So whether you're good at drawing or not, there's definitely ways to use maps in your game. But the question is, guys, how are you using maps in your games? What are your best resources? Put them in the comments below and share them with your fellow gamers. While you're at it, like, share, and subscribe.
Don't forget to check out Nord Games and use that coupon code.
So until next time,
Stay nerdy.